Hello, everybody. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. I'm Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. Folks, this week we're going to be talking about some franchise futures, specifically Star Wars. News came down the pike, not Syndicate, that Kathleen Kennedy is going to step down from Lucasfilm at the end of 2025, which is, needless to say, pretty big news for that franchise, which I think some people are considering. Some people consider her leaving a win, and some people are very concerned. So it'll be interesting to talk about that. Joining me this week is somebody who literally wrote a book about Star Wars, and not Amy Radcliffe. But Nerdist's very own Dando Calrissian, Dan Casey. Hey, man, how are you?
This deal gets better all the time. I'm great, Kyle. Happy to be back. I'm sorry that I'm not Amy for everyone who got excited for a moment. I wake up with that same disappointment every morning.
Oh, rats. I'm not Amy.
Oh, rats, Cliff.
Yeah. We are, in fact, in the same room for the first time. Well, we've been in the same room a lot.
Can you imagine if we hadn't for the last decade?
Yeah, we've never met in person. But we are recording in the same room because we do work literally right next to each other. So
yeah.
If it sounds a little different, that's because we are not in our own individual setups. But you get how podcasting works. But
how does pod racing work?
Now, this is it. We know that this is pod racing.
It's a certified yippee from me.
That's a yippee from me, dog.
R.I.P. Watto, R.I.P. Sebulba, R.I.P. Ben
Quadraneros. His power coupling just completely beefed it. I don't know what we're talking about. So
it's called a Ronto roast, not beef. I don't think they have cows in Star Wars.
That's true. Ronto. Have you ever seen the video of them, of the Lucasfilm people showing George Lucas a lot of the like creatures that they were coming up for the special edition, and they like showed what we know is the Ronto, and they call it like they say it's the Bronto creature because it's like a Brontosaurus, and they were trying to figure out what to call it, and George Lucas just goes, just take the B off and call it a Ronto. It's literally as quickly as he goes.
It reminds me as well of there was some like story, apocryphal or otherwise, when they were asking George to come up with the names of the names of a new Sith Lord, and he's just like, how about Darth Icky or Darth Insanius? To be fair, Darth Insanius kind of slaps.
I kind of like that one. Well, they did come up with General Grievous.
Yes.
Whose name might as well be I'm a Bad Guy.
I'm a Bad Guy was taken. It also just didn't fit with that world. They were saving it for the eventual Star Wars Underworld series, which never quite made it to air, but we sort of got it through Andor / the Mando.
Yeah. So it seems like we haven't had Star Wars stuff in a while, and yet
there's been Star Peace or a Star Mistus.
Yeah. A Star Mistus. Oh, incredible. Oh, Dan. This is the kind of fun you get with Dan.
It's all downhill from here, folks.
But we just saw the trailer, which I thought was a very weird trailer for Andor season 2, the last trailer. Not the last trailer, the last season. And also the weird announcement of the release schedule, which is going to be 3 episodes a week for a month, which is a real...
Yes, they're releasing it in pockets over the course of a single month. And I understand, I guess, narratively the decision. It's supposed to be because there's time skips in between each sort of batch of episodes. That's how I understood it.
Yeah.
But look, as someone who's a Star Wars fan and specifically thinks that Andor is the best thing to come out of the galaxy far, far away in the Disney era, this sucks, man. This really sucks.
Well, also people like us who have to cover it. It's like we got to cover 3 feature-length things a week.
But like sort of Star Champagne problems aside,
Sure.
I think it does the show a disservice because yes, it's great to have so many episodes at once, especially if you're a fan, to be like, oh boy, what a treat. But the way that shows like Andor, I think, really thrive is through that week-to-week theorizing, discussion. I think we've sort of definitively proven in this era of like sort of streaming bloat that you're going to get more bang for your buck if you're dropping your shows week to week rather than all at once. I feel like the binge model is dead unless you are coming to a show later on. Then it's nice to have that binge, or if you're waiting till it's all done. But I don't know. I think that it's a real bummer, and maybe they just don't want to spend the marketing dollars on it, but they should, because Andor season 1, as I said, best thing they've done so far in the post Disney era.
Yeah, it's totally true, and it, I've seen speculation online that it was sort of like, not necessarily dumping it, but like since
Dump it. This one doesn't work. Dump it. Sorry. I think you should leave Intrusive Thoughts.
yes, always that. But that because it wasn't part of the kind of Filoni machine, it was outside of that they were sort of like, well, just, whatever. We already said you guys already made it, so it's fine. But like, it is universally hailed as the best, galactically hailed as the best Star Wars thing.
Yeah, I would say from like a critical perspective, and just like, I think Andor, look, Star Wars, I know they want it to be all things to all people, but they've increasingly been making things that aren't necessarily geared towards every single audience. Like Skeleton Crew, I think, was definitely designed for more of a younger skewing audience and had that in mind. But I don't know. I think that if they want this show to be about space genocide and revolution and people standing up to fascism, I think that you need to give that room to grow and be like, and just speak to a more adult viewer. I know this is all of us talking about our space wizards with laser swords in their space fantasy. But at the same time, if you want to grapple with these very challenging concepts, I think you need to let Tony Gilroy cook and give the show time to simmer.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. However, and we're going to cover it obviously on this show because it is the best, and there's a lot to dive into. But I would have liked them to do that weekly, because that would have been 12 weeks that we get, or at least 2 a week. You know what I mean? Like 6 weeks or something like that. 3 episodes a week just seems like so many when it is that kind of heavy of a show.
Yes. And especially, I don't know, I get that this is going to be the final season of Andor. For those who don't know, it was always conceived of as a 2-season endeavor, basically leading up to the events of Rogue One, because, well, if you've seen Rogue One, you have a sense of why we haven't seen some of these characters appear again in the canon.
There's a sense of finality in that movie.
Yes. Yes, it was their Death Starring role. But I agree. I'm just a little discouraged by this release model. Again, it definitely smacks of they're not willing to put marketing dollars behind it.
Yeah. And you can do it. They did it with Spider-Man, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. They did it like 2, 3, 4, and 3 or something like that. Like a crazy amount of episodes dumped at once. But maybe there's a sort of thing, and I have absolutely no idea, but like where Disney doesn't want things to be airing that long. Do you know what I mean? Like, I truly don't know.
Don't want to give it a chance to lose interest or have like viewer attrition. I can see that. I mean, look, I can see as well where it's like, if you find something you really like and you want more of it right away, we're in that era of instant gratification. So you do want more, but I don't know, maybe viewer patience or attention spans are dwindling and they just want to keep people in it for a shorter period of time so they can tell their full story. I'm sure there's thought that's been put into this other than just someone twirling a mustache and saying, only 1 month of airtime for you.
Yeah. I hope that's not the case. And also, it's not going to make the show any better or worse. Do you know what I mean? So like, we at least have that to hang our hat on because the first season was so good. I mean, whatever. It's not like they have to hang on to viewers all that much because they're not planning to make any more. But we saw with the show everybody hated, The Acolyte, which I didn't hate, but I definitely didn't think was all that great. But like they put so much effort behind that one, and people really did not enjoy it. That I kind of feel like, or I worry perhaps that anything that isn't Grogu and the Mandalorian, they are sort of like worried about doing it at all. And that might be stemming from Kathy Kennedy either about to leave or this is what caused her to leave. So I don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, look, as she has proven, being the head of Lucasfilm is a extremely thankless job, even when a large segment of fandom is thanking you.
Yeah.
There is an equally vocal part, definitely more vocal, I would say, that is just complaining and just yelling into the void. Just the amount of the cottage industry of just moronic, troglodytic, rage bait people online, just sort of complaining about just this new era of Star Wars. Anytime someone just, like, God, if I hear someone say the word woke unironically, my spirit leaves my body.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Just these people who just have the media literacy of, I don't know, Anakin Skywalker on a desert planet.
Yeah.
It's just embarrassing. But I think that it's a thankless job. People have such a strong attachment to this world, this legacy, this IP, and they want to project onto it what they want to see. And whoever's going to step into this position, I think, has to understand what a sort of fractious environment it is. But it also does represent a wealth of possibility. It's a whole galaxy far, far away. I know that's sort of been my complaint over the last few years, or the last decade of Star Wars storytelling since The Force Awakens, which is, I don't want to only hear stories about the Skywalkers.
Right.
That's why, at least on paper, I was excited about the prospect of The Acolyte, because it was an era that we hadn't seen before. And
Right.
I think that's important, especially if you want to keep bringing in new viewers. Like, yes, you can do so much. You can tell stories in all of these different continuities. We've proven that's the case. We've really relitigated all of the prequel era, because that has been enhanced so dramatically by all of the ancillary and supporting content, like the Clone Wars, like Star Wars Rebels, all of these shows that enriched what was there on screen that, fans of the original trilogy maybe railed against when they saw them. But then people who grew up with the prequels were like, actually, these are great. We love them. They have a special place in our heart. And I'm very curious if we're going to experience that as well. I'm going to go all over the place right now with people who are growing up with the sequel trilogy and seeing if they have a special place in their heart for those movies. Although if they really and truly love The Rise of Skywalker, that's another story altogether. It's Godspeed.
Yeah. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum, as people say, but
I'll yuck it.
yeah, it yucked my yum.
Yucked, losers. Sorry.
Very few times in this job have I left a big franchise movie like that, a screening, and everyone kind of just collectively being like, huh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of want to, as we dive into the future of the franchise, I do kind of want to look back at all the things that Kathleen Kennedy did. She became the chairperson of Lucasfilm only a few months before the sale went through.
Yeah.
And then George Lucas himself retired or just abdicated the throne kind of thing for $4 billion, all or most of which he gave to charities, which is, he's a cool dude. But yeah, it seemed right away there were people who were very afraid of what was going to happen with Star Wars under Disney. It's not like Star Wars had done all that much since, with the exception of the cartoon, the Clone Wars, which was great. It hadn't really done anything since the now 20-year-old movie Revenge of the Sith,
which is coming back to theaters this year.
Hell yeah.
That hurts my back hearing it's been 20 years.
I know. I was in college when that came out, so that's how old I feel. But yeah, when you think about the movies that came out, we had the sequel trilogy, but then we also had Rogue One and Solo, which were filler, they're filler movies. They're, whether you like them or not. And there were bits of both that I enjoy, and other bits that I didn't, but it became very clear that it's all we're going to do in this new universe is just, as you were saying earlier, just fill in the gaps of
increasingly granular bits of canon.
Yeah.
I've seen sort of the term bandied about before, the MCUification of Star Wars, needing to make all of this connective tissue where you need to know what happened during the 6 seconds between which Darth Vader leaves his ship and then boards the Tantive 4.
Yeah.
And look, it was a very cool hallway fight we got at the end of Rogue One,
Sure.
but we don't necessarily need it to be as granular as some people might expect it to be. But at the same time, I do think there are certain stories that enhance things. I think Andor is a great example.
Yeah.
Where it adds a really rich texture to the build up to the events of both Rogue One and A New Hope.
Yeah.
Because it's not focusing on Jedi and Sith. It's focusing on the people in the galaxy far, far away in a way that we really hadn't seen before.
And that's something I've wanted forever, which is I just get so tired of Jedi Sith stuff. I'm there needs to be a world where other stuff happens. And also, what Order 66 was apparently really bad if all these Jedi just didn't get killed. I thought the whole point was that it was only Yoda and Obi-Wan. or maybe a couple other ones. But you just, as you go further and further along in the sequel era, or the original trilogy era too, like it just is like, what? How many of these people did it?
But wait, there's more. Billy Mays here for Order 66.
Yeah, like I really don't understand where all these people were hiding, because we also had, Jude Law's character from Skeleton Crew. He's there's just constant, and I think one of the biggest offenders was season 2 and 3 of The Mandalorian. Season 1 of which I think is great. It's perfect almost.
I will say, to your point about there being so many Jedi survivors, I do think that, look, the whole thing is about just destroying the structure of the Jedi Order, and they do a good job. Like, the Jedi Order is shattered. Like, their codification, their traditions, their schools, their abilities to train new generations of Padawan, that is effectively dismantled. So I'm willing to buy into, it is a large galaxy. I'm willing to buy that there are Jedi that slipped through the cracks, or things that they managed to escape somehow. We saw some of like the sort of the underground routes they took to evade capture in Kenobi, the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which was...
I forgot about it.
Yeah, I'd say no more. Please. It was not my cup of tea. And I will say that I do love Star Wars, and I find things that I enjoy within, even if I don't enjoy the overall packaging, as was the case in Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
But my point being, I think it also speaks to the larger point of Star Wars in some sense, which is, they talk about the Force being this thing that connects all of us across the vast distances of the galaxy. Every living being is suffused with it. So I'm willing to buy that, but it's getting to be a bit trite at this point when you're like, wait, you survived too? How did this happen?
Yeah. And more, it's just, as excited as I was that, Dave Filoni's going to live action, great, which is something that I was excited because I did like Rebels, and also Clone Wars. Didn't expect to like Rebels. It started out much more kind of juvenile, and then it became really cool and interesting. But like, it just seems like more and more, it is not catering to the wider audience. It is only catering to people who are as granular into this world as we are. And it's just like, and I feel that way about a lot of different franchises. It's like, I don't want to watch something, even if I understand all of it. It's like, why do I always have to like stop aiming things at me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I would love to see things aimed at other people once in a while.
Yeah. I've seen some folks sort of rolling their eyes at, what has become referred to online as Glup Shido's, a character that has appeared in other Star Wars media, or a minor character just appearing in sometimes prominent role, or just appearing in the background, and that becoming sort of the, we're going to pull in, you liked this thing from this show? We're going to pull that into live action, and now they're here. Do you like this? Is that good?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but that doesn't sort of rub me the wrong way as it does to some people online. Sort of, there's talk about like slop for the content machine.
Sure.
Sort of just to use a sort of terminally online, irony poisoned verbiage here.
Yeah.
When you're building a franchise and making something at this scale for film, television, books, comics, video games, etc., there's going to be a certain amount of an assembly line quality that happens there. I'm hopeful that if there is a change in stewardship, it does seem like they're also taking a long, hard look at, okay, maybe our previous strategy wasn't yielding the results that we wanted. How can we bring this all together? And I do think some of that will hinge on, one of the movies they have coming up, The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is supposed to unite these disparate plot threads. Not that they all need to connect like that, but if that is what they have promised, then I'm eager to see how they land this space plane, this X-Wing. Is this going to be like another happy landing, or are they going to pull a Holdo maneuver and just like blast on through?
And I'm cool with that if that feels like it's going to be the end of something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like let's put this era of storytelling between basically from Clone Wars forward, but like certainly Rebels, like the Ahsoka Tano era, let's call it.
Yes.
Like we don't have to definitively kill her off or anything like that, but just sort of like
Ahsoka died on her way back to her home planet.
she really poochied that.
Yeah.
But as excited as I know a lot of people, the aforementioned Amy Radcliffe being one, that like the Rebels characters made it to live action.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it felt very much like just treading water, which is what I feel like the MCU is kind of doing right now. So that we can get to, it's like, well, we got to reintroduce this character so that this character comes into it. And that is less exciting to me and also less satisfying as a viewer than something like Andor, which is, even though it is, the lead up to the war, it's much more about kind of themes and character and just kind of growing the world in a way. And, world building shouldn't just be names of things and like new tech or something like that. It needs to be like, what else is literally happening? Like, so spending a whole show with people who are just kind of living their life on a planet is really interesting.
And I mean, look, to use Andor as an example, like a great piece of world building for me that also proved to be connective tissue in a way where it's like, oh, this is how this event leads to that event, is when you see the prisoners on Narkina 5, you realize these cogs that they're making, which is just sort of like, on its face, you're like, what is this like dystopian sci-fi nightmare where these people have to make cogs day after day on this electrified floor in this horrifying labor camp? You find out, they are literally cogs in the Imperial machine, but also making cogs and widgets for the eventual Death Star.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, you get this sense of how they were able to construct this weapon of mass destruction so quickly on the backs of people they were oppressing so they could use it to oppress more people. And that to me is just, I thought they did a really good job at showing sort of the degrees of horror with that.
Yeah.
It's on the one hand, it's like, Leo pointing at the TV like, oh, hey, I get that. But on the other hand, it does serve a greater narrative purpose.
Yeah. If there's resonance behind it, I think that's, I have no issues. I think kind of a strange example I'm about to use is the Damon Lindelof Watchmen series, where it's got all the iconography. If you've read the book, I have not talked to anybody who hasn't read the graphic novel and then watched it, but
I would be impressed if somehow that happens.
Yeah, so it is very esoteric in that fashion, but it's taking what we know from that book and kind of building upon it and everything like that and kind of twisting some stuff in the characters in a really interesting way while staying true to the source material. That alone makes me really excited for the Lantern series to see what he has to say in that kind of field. So something like that, or something like Andor is the positive way of doing that. Whereas I feel like Ahsoka would, and not really the Acolyte, because I think the Acolyte was doing its own thing, but and some of the the Mandalorian season 3 I think was a really poor example of, it's like, okay, this is just
sort of treading water. I think was a good example, and sort of to build off of that a little bit. You mentioned the MCU as another example of something that feels like it's doing that. Both the MCU and Star Wars are approaching these sort of inflection points from a chronological perspective because they're both coming up on pretty important anniversaries. The MCU, the year after Secret Wars comes out, that'll be the 20th anniversary of the MCU launching with Iron Man, 2028. That will be 20 years of continuous interconnected storytelling at a scale that is heretofore unprecedented. It's insane.
Yeah.
And, it seems by necessity that after Secret Wars, we've discussed on this podcast as well, it's going to be something of a soft reset, or maybe a hard reset. We don't know. It's going to be a reset for continuity, just much like it was in the comics on which it's based. The Secret Wars event from 2015, Jonathan Hickman, Assad Ribic. Definitely check it out if you haven't. But that really hits the reset button on continuity, and I think that's what they're going to do with the MCU. Star Wars is a little bit different. They're coming up on their 50th anniversary in 2027, and it has not been 5 Star Wars releases every year for 50 years, or else I would understand why people would be a bit overwhelmed. They've produced much more content in the last decade than they had in the prior decade.
Absolutely.
And I don't think they need to necessarily hit the reset button. I do wish they'd stop using horrifying, deep faked people to bring back dead actors. Let them rest in peace. Just recast them. We have imaginations.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's an opportunity for them to lay out a new hope for the galaxy far, far away by giving us, you can give people stories across different eras. It's sort of what they're already doing that a bit with some of their transmedia with what they're trying to do with the High Republic.
The High Republic.
What they're doing with the High Republic. Giving us a taste of a different era. James Mangold's in development Star Wars movie is supposed to be like 10,000 years before the events of A New Hope. So that's what excites me. And we can still pepper in these other stories set during the original trilogy or the prequel era or the sequel trilogy, like, the Rey movie going to be about the new Jedi Order.
Right.
I think you need to have this like multi-pronged approach to it where you're giving people different flavors and different stories across different eras because you have such a rich canvas and a much bigger canvas in some senses than Marvel to play with because, it is a whole galaxy.
Yeah.
And not to say that Marvel doesn't explore, there's Guardians of the Galaxy,
Of
but
course, yes.
I think that there's a lot of untapped and unmined potential in Star Wars in particular that I'm hopeful whatever this new regime is, if Kathleen Kennedy leaves at the end of 2025. There was a CNN report that came out that said, no, she's not.
Oh, well.
But I don't know if that's actually going to be the case. This was first reported by Puck News, I believe, earlier this week that she was going to be leaving. They have a pretty good track record over at Puck of muckraking and puck raking. So I'm inclined to believe that she could be stepping down, especially with the alacrity with which I've seen all of these other outlets and trades and reports coming out, people bandying about different names for who could step into that pilot seat. So I don't know. What do you think in terms of what you've seen so far from people that would be potentially taking over the stewardship of the franchise?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because obviously we have a very small subset of people or of I guess output at the moment with DC Studios with James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over is obviously on the one hand you have a producer who's produced a million things and then somebody with a proven track record of making big comic book movies and comic book movies at DC too, with, Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad. So I think there's a really good potential. Obviously, since they took over, we've only seen Creature Commandos.
Sure.
I'm very hopeful about the rest of
everything. We'll get a real bellwether for that pairing of James Gunn and Peter Safran at DC Studios later this year when Superman comes out. But I do think on paper it's smart because, Gunn is no stranger to making movies at that scale.
Totally.
And Peter Safran can definitely handle more of the studio politics side of things. But I think that's, that has sort of been a model that's been floated for, maybe something like this could work for Star Wars and Lucasfilm.
Yeah, because I've seen people Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau as an example of they could just take over. But I would hope that they would take a similar approach in that Gunn has said from the beginning and just said last week, I got to go to a thing, a little state of the studio address kind of thing that they gave, basically saying what we announced was just kind of a taste of what we wanted to do.
Yes.
But nothing is going into production until we have a finished script. And if a script comes in that we didn't even think about that's ready to go, then which is where Clayface came in. The movie was ready to go. It was going to be a small budget. It's a different type of thing. So they're going to do that. I think I kind of worry about people who are in the system already, just kind of continuing, but without the kind of, because Kathy Kennedy is a producer first.
Yeah.
She understands the kind of, we have to try to appeal to all these things. Whereas I do kind of worry that Favreau and Filoni are just going to go, well, great, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And no one else gets to have any, breathing room.
Yeah, but at the same time, say what you will about Favreau and Filoni if they're not your cup of tea, but at least having a sort of a cohesion of vision and creative understanding of what they want to do, I think that is definitely viable. And it might be different if they were in charge versus still having to answer up the corporate ladder to someone else who's at the top of the pyramid. Something I saw, I think it was I was reading a Variety article about this, I think, or Hollywood Reporter, one of those two.
Sure.
Talking about how during the Kathleen Kennedy era under Lucasfilm, they really announced working with all of these different filmmakers like Lord and Miller, Taika Waititi, James Mangold,
Patty
Jenkins, announced all of these projects that kind of just went nowhere or sort of fizzled out. Kevin Feige was supposed to be making a Star Wars movie. And then you have other documented examples of someone like Gareth Edwards, who made Rogue One, and that was drastically reshaped and restructured in reshoots where, they brought in Tony Gilroy, who's now doing Andor, and like, look, clearly Gilroy has the sauce. But at the same time, if you're hiring these directors and creatives, it's ostensibly because you want their creative vision. And I think maybe that is something that's a mountain they'll have to, that's a hurdle they'll have to contend with if if people want to sort of play in that sandbox, if they're worried like, well, is this really going to be my movie? Sometimes people say that about like the MCU as well. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, well, you're not really going to get to put your stamp on this per se. I don't know how true that is.
Sure.
Because I definitely think you can see different directors' personalities and ideas come through in these different movies. But it is definitely, looking at all of these things that were announced versus what we're getting, it clearly seems, at least like the stuff coming from Filoni and Favreau, they have been able to play within the sandbox in a way that worked with the Star Wars corporate structure. And I know Filoni's the chief creative officer, so like that makes sense. But who knows? It might be different if they are at sort of the top of the pyramid and then don't necessarily have the time to be directing and writing them themselves. They might have to then give some of that creative control or place your trust in collaborators who you can trust to bring your vision of a unified universe to life.
When you look at, because obviously, like you mentioned, all those announced projects that some of which have gone away officially, some of which have sort of just backburnered or whatever. When you think about, it's been 13 years since she took over, or since Disney bought it, because it was 2012 when that happened.
Yeah.
I remember it well. And they've only made 5 movies, and like, let me look at the number of shows. There's been quite a few more shows, but
Mando, Bad Batch, Star Wars Visions,
Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor,
Robert Fettuccine. How could I forget?
Ahsoka, The Skeleton Crew, and Acolyte. So they've definitely put their stamp on television, I think, in a way that
sure.
But all 5 of those movies, like Force Awakens, made a crap ton of money, and sort of set the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And then they went completely a different direction. People always talk about, well, they didn't have a plan in place beforehand. It's like, well, nobody really does if you don't really know what's going to work or whatever.
Yes.
I do think that, so they made those 5 movies in 5 years, basically, and then didn't make another movie for the next 6 years. So it's sort of like, it's really, yes, there was a pandemic and all that stuff, but it just seems really surprising to me that they, for as long as the Disney regime has been, the output of films has been so small overall. Because Mandalorian and Grogu movie is coming out next year, I think.
At the stroke of midnight.
May 22nd, 2026.
Okay.
Which is in post-production. Nothing else is even like...
I'm sure it's because the date doesn't line up, but why put out a Star Wars movie in May if you're not going to put it out on May 25th?
Great question. I don't know why they would do that.
Yeah.
Because it's a Tuesday, probably.
Yeah, I get it. Like I said, I'm sure there's a good calendar reason for it, but come on.
So some of the other movies that they have, at least in the pipeline right now, there's the New Jedi Order film, which is the one that Rey, Daisy Ridley is going to be in. Although I think that I saw somewhere very briefly that one has been kind of, it's being pushed back a little bit.
It's being pushed back. I believe they brought on another writer to take another crack at the script.
Got
it. But it is still in the pipeline as far as we know.
Yes.
As far as we know.
But that seemed like a kind of a coup because after the trilogy, like Daisy Ridley, really everyone seemed like they wanted nothing to do with Star Wars anymore.
Oh God, the fandom, a vocal part of the fandom, really hurt my enjoyment of Star Wars.
Same.
Just like it was embarrassing.
Yeah,
it's something where it used to be like a shared joy, and then just I would never expect it to be as divisive as it became, but. I guess that's just the fractious world we live in.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like, and maybe it was always that way. And like, I wasn't on the internet or the nascent internet when the prequel trilogy was coming out. I only kind of knew well after the fact that we all kind of collectively didn't really care for those movies. And so maybe it was terrible and toxic at the time, and it just got louder over as people, women and people of color got hired, just come to the forefront. But boy, yeah, it was a really tough time, especially for us, at Nerdist, having to kind of contend with just comments all the time about everything. Like if we came out saying we liked a movie, we were shills. And that was it, basically. Like if you didn't agree with these blowhards online, then you were not a true fan, even though they don't represent true fandom either. There is no true fan.
And look, there's nothing wrong with disliking something.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with it. Just don't be a flagrant asshole all the time, always.
Yeah.
Just use your critical thinking to vocalize an argument in a way that makes sense.
And I think that's so. One of the major issues, I think, from my perspective with a lot of this stuff is that because some of the worst people with the worst takes dislike one of these movies or shows or whatever, if you also dislike it for more legitimate reasons, then I feel bad. Like, I don't want to be lumped in with these guys. You know what I mean? So then it's like, well, now I have to either say nicer things about it because I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I felt that way about, I really liked The Last Jedi, but I know some people who used to work with us who were like really disliked it, but weren't shitty about it. They just didn't like it.
Yeah,
it's just
and
fine.
that's great. I always enjoy talking to someone who did not like something that I really like because I'm fascinated to hear why.
Yeah.
But that's why they are friends and not nameless people online who just are just spewing garbaggio into the stratosphere.
And I think like the most recent example being The Acolyte, which is a show nobody liked, and yet nobody liked for the same reason, basically. Like there were definitely people who disliked it for real bad, real toxic reasons.
And I won't say nobody liked it. I do know plenty of people that enjoyed the show. Sure. I just think it's with any of these, your mileage may vary.
Absolutely.
It's just depending on what you like or don't like about a particular slice of storytelling. And in this case, I think it definitely was divisive for all the right reasons and all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. So obviously, like, toxic fandom aside, that didn't help. But there's also the aforementioned James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi film, which is a TBA right now. James Mangold also has possibly a Swamp Thing movie in the works, but he went and made a Bob Dylan movie instead, and so who knows?
No, they're actually part of a shared universe. Bob Dylan does become Swamp Thing canonically if you listen to the post credits coda in Hurricane, he does become Swamp Thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Dr. Alec Holland.
Yes.
Is actually Bob Dylan.
Uh-huh.
I get it. He went into hiding.
Yeah, if you rearrange the letters in Alec Holland, it does spell Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And add some extra letters.
And I urge you all to try doing that.
Yes, and we'll wait until you've done that.
And then the only other one that's been like officially announced, unofficially, whatever, is Dave Filoni writing and directing a New Republic film, which is, of course, the culmination probably of all of the Ahsoka era stuff.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on any of those? Are you excited for?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm excited for the James Mangold one. I'm excited to see what a like Rey New Jedi Order story could be, unshackled from the sort of Skywalker saga of it all.
Yeah.
I didn't love how they ended that. It's sort of like you mentioned, it was sort of all over the place. I'm just curious to see them move forward. Yeah. I want them to either move forward, go back in time. I want to see something that is outside of the bounds of this sort of like 60-year time period we've spent the last 50 years or so.
Yeah, totally. Let me ask you this question, because I run into this sometimes. Like, I don't like every Star Wars movie or every like franchise movie just in general. Can you watch Star Wars and maybe the MCU are the two examples that are the toughest to divorce from the rest of this? Can you watch just a movie in isolation for either of them? I bring up The Last Jedi. It's like, can you watch The Last Jedi knowing where it ends and then try to not think about Rise of Skywalker?
I mean, look, humanity is capable of anything if they put their mind to it.
Oh, sure. We all contain multitudes.
Yes. But my particular multitudes are definitely continuity minded. So
Yeah.
I am a completionist by nature. So I don't think I could just be like, and the story ends here. I would rewatch a movie if I wanted to rewatch that movie, but it would still be in the context of being like, okay, well, I know what this is building towards, because especially in the context of a franchise, I do like interconnected storytelling, and I can appreciate when that's what they're going for. I don't know. I think there are some that are engineered to be able to be watched in sort of the absence of others, like, even though they are defined by that context, like Solo is a good example, where it's a movie that does stand on its own, but it does kind of require you to understand who Han Solo is. You don't have to.
Right.
It would be very funny if that's your introduction to Han Solo as a character.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I do think it's a spin-off. It's a spin-off of the main. It's a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
It sort of is built on the idea that you have seen the Star Wars trilogy, at least the original trilogy.
I kind of get that with, as we get further and further into the MCU, and I bet now I could go back and watch some of the earlier ones again. But there was a period of time when it's like, can I watch, even my favorite stuff like The Winter Soldier? It's like, can I actually watch that in isolation and then not worry about watching? Because it's like, I already know 17 other things that happen.
But I feel like something like that, I think that is a good example of one you could watch, because that's like just that's a fun little Captain America story. Fun little story about his best friend coming back from presumed death to be a murder assassin. No, I think that is a good example of one that you could go back and just watch.
Right.
Because yes, it's presuming you have some knowledge of Captain America, but you don't need to really think about what that means for Infinity War or Endgame. You can just kind of watch that and be like, cool, spy thriller, like has these big implications for the universe. And I think that is when Marvel can be at its best, when it's telling these stories that are both self-contained but do set up something to happen in the next one, without it just being like kind of an ellipsis trailing off to be like, and because this happened, ... what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
It's more, I like when it's able to be inferred or sort of set up as a teaser in the post-credits versus the meat of the story only being in service of the next item on the menu.
Yeah. And we did talk about, Mikey and I talked about this a couple weeks ago with, or was it last week? Who even knows anymore? With Captain America, Brave New World. But like, that to me felt like, and it has been since kind of Endgame, where it's just like, few and far between have been the movies that are more new or standalone-y stuff than stuff that connects. Like I just recently, a couple weeks ago, rewatched Guardians 3 because I was with my family and they hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is just a great movie. Like this one does not require much else.
No, it helps if you've seen the other Guardians just to understand some of the dynamics at play there. And like, it helps if you've seen at that point Endgame, because then you'll have understood, okay, why is Gamora being so weird?
Right.
But even so, I do think there are plenty both in Marvel and Star Wars that can stand alone. But at least with Star Wars, it's like, okay, these are meant to be trilogies.
Right.
These are meant to be like, okay, it's like, you can watch just one Lord of the Rings movie, and I think that stands alone just fine. But like, you'll probably want to watch the others. It's like Pringles. What kind of freak stops at just one?
Yeah.
But the Marvel comparison is interesting because one of the names I've seen sort of bandied around for potentially taking over the space throne is Kevin Feige.
Right.
But I would be well and truly shocked if he were to do that, because he's so close to kind of just closing out this era of Marvel storytelling. I don't know why he would jump ship a couple years before that plane is supposed to land.
Totally.
I feel like, if nothing else, he's going to stay through the end of Secret Wars. And then if he wants to ride off into the sunset, even if like the next couple movies don't do particularly well, or they sort of like bomb critically, it's still a pretty unassailable feat to make something that has maintained this level of quality for this long. But to have him then immediately go over to Star Wars, I would be surprised. And this is also because Jermaine Lucier over at IO9 tweeted out earlier today about 10 years ago, he interviewed Kevin Feige where he asked him about if he was ever going to, maybe step into that role and run Lucasfilm. And Feige said, I have two jobs: running Marvel, being a big Marvel fan, and being a big Star Wars nerd. Those are my two jobs. My house is full of Star Wars, so I'm as big a Star Wars fan as there is. What's great is I've often said if I wasn't making these Marvel movies, I'd be waiting in line to see them. But, and this must happen to you too, you're behind the scenes. You see things and you're losing the purity of the experience of being a film fan. I've not lost that at all with Star Wars, and I don't want to lose that. I saw The Force Awakens at the premiere, but I probably knew less than you about the movie. The closest I have sometimes, we were doing Doctor Strange in the Vicinity, where there were some Star Wars things starting to happen, and sometimes I try to peek around a corner and see a big piece of plywood turned into a ship or some kind and geek out. So I like being the Star Wars fan that I am. Granted, that was a decade ago.
Sure.
At one point he had a deal to make a Star Wars movie. I'm sure he would probably still love to produce a Star Wars movie, but I don't know if he'd want to then step in and run all of Lucasfilm.
Yeah. One, it's also like, I won't say a lateral move because obviously they're completely different things. And by his own admission, he's a huge, huge fan. But like, wouldn't you want to take a little break? You know what I mean? Or do individual, maybe make a Star Wars movie or something like that. But would you want to take over the reins of somehow a franchise that is even more like scrutinized?
Yeah. And I guess the question is like, is this something you've been waiting for and didn't realize was even possible until now it suddenly does become possible? He's definitely a name I've seen bandied about. I've seen a few others. I think it was a Variety or Hollywood Reporter article. Again, at this point, it's all blended together. I saw names like David Heyman from the Harry Potter franchise, Mary Parent, who works for our parent company, Legendary, which oversees Dune and Godzilla and a bunch of other cool franchises. But it's really kind of a big question mark at this point because it is such a challenging role for someone to step into, but it also does require a certain level of fandom, I do believe.
I agree.
Because I do think that is something that has made Kevin Feige such a success with Marvel, is his passion for the material is very evident. Like, he's clearly a big comic nerd. It's something that I think has worked in Gunn's favor, stepping into DC, where it's clearly he's passionate about this. It's not to say other people that I listed wouldn't be passionate, but like, I think that level of knowledge of Star Wars minutia is definitely something that is important for a facet of this role.
When I think somebody trying to step into either Marvel, let's say if Kevin Feige does retire or step aside, Marvel or Star Wars, is that you are, regardless of how high up you are at Marvel Studios or Lucasfilm, you're still under the thumb of Disney.
Yes.
So like, we have obviously seen a few times when things that sounded like Kathleen Kennedy was like all on board with them. For example, Colin Trevorrow directing the third sequel movie, or Lord and Miller making Solo, and then something happened, and then they had to like pivot, and because it wasn't fitting the model. Now, we obviously don't know what happened behind the scenes about all that stuff. Could have been Kathy being like, "This sucks, get out of here." Like, we have absolutely no idea.
Yeah. My one regret about the Colin Trevorrow not directing episode 9 is when that concept art came out of a lightsaber guillotine, which just sounded like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I don't know if you've read that script.
I have not.
It's pretty wild. It goes in a lot more of the direction that because that script was much more a reaction to The Last Jedi, but like continuing what The Last Jedi set up rather than going completely backwards. This is truly the problem.
Yeah.
I read or listened to an interview with Adam Driver sometime last year on, of all things, the Rich Eisen show, which is, sports.
Yeah.
But asking
the big megalopolis crowd over there.
Yeah. Was it Megalopolis? Yeah, it was some.
It was last year.
Yeah. But it kind of came out that like, as far as he knew when they were getting ready to make the movie, like, or, going into the franchise, it was always going to be Kylo Ren, refused the call to the light side and became dark for the foreseeable future. And it was only because of the kind of reaction to, or the retaking over of J.J. Abrams, that it went the other way. And it kind of was like, no, he needs a redemption arc or whatever. But
sorry, the way you said that, I imagined the retaking over of J.J. Abrams like the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that is what I meant.
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams is a train. Doodah doodah.
Good Lord.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have an answer of who I would like to take over. Somebody who I would honestly like to see somebody who has passion and knowledge. I would actually, somebody like a Chris Miller or a Phil Lord who have clearly the knowledge. They've made franchise movies. They've done all sorts of things, but they are not beholden to the legacy of Lucasfilm or the legacy of George Lucas, which I think is kind of Filoni's issue, is that he came up under George Lucas directly and just considers him God, which is,
Yeah. To me, I feel like the best idea I've heard so far is some sort of pairing akin to what DC has done.
I think that
we have someone who is definitely more creative minded and someone who's a bit more logistics minded, because I'm sure there are people out there who have a singular vision for what a robust version of the galaxy far, far away could be across film, television, comics, video games, etc. But I don't know who that person is. And I feel like the best bet would be to find someone who's really dialed in on the creative and someone who can help them achieve that in a way that is scalable and makes sense and will not just result in a bunch of projects being either announced and then withering away, or just they need to sort of like dial in a little bit. They need to lock in. And I'm hopeful that I feel like that would be best achieved through a sort of dynamic duo. A rule of two, if you will.
Like a dyad?
Yes.
Some sort of forced dyad. I completely agree. I think, and then not to just keep saying Gunn and Safran are doing it the best, because we actually don't know yet. But like the concept that, like, again, at this thing that I went to last week, somebody asked, might have been Jermaine actually, so what we've heard about The Brave and the Bold, the Batman movie, and then also Batman 2, the Batman 2 keeps getting pushed. Like, what are what's happening? And they were saying like, well, both scripts are being developed and all this stuff. And it's like, but Peter Safran ultimately said, we have a release date of October 2027. A Batman movie will come out in October of 2027.
Yeah.
And that's when you need the logistics-minded producer.
Yes.
Because a script might never be finished, as far as people say, but it's like, okay, well then, sorry, Matt, like, we got to do The Brave and the Bold because we need a Batman movie to fill out our coffers for this quarter or whatever.
To keep people engaged because the public demands the bat.
Yeah. And I think something that DC and Marvel have in their back pocket is a wide array of different types of characters and types of stories.
Sure.
I would love to see Star Wars, in the ancillary material, comics and whatnot, they've gone in different age ranges and things like that. I would love to see that more from Star Wars, like not a horror movie necessarily, but
you could.
But you could
easily
do it.
could. That would be such a slick move for them to do. There's so many ways they could pull that off, and like that to me is like, feeling like you need to stay in this one sort of space fantasy epic bubble. I don't think that's the case. And you've seen different shades of that on TV as well, with Andor being much more of like a in the trenches, like political thriller.
Yeah.
I think if they keep expanding that, I think they will be very well served ultimately.
I think so too. And like Skeleton Crew, which I ended up not even watching, but like the people who watched it really enjoyed it, and they liked it because it was like, hey, this is a different like energy, because it's not the same kind of stayed, because that's been the issue with a lot of, the Star Wars TV shows recently, where they all kind of feel the same in terms of tone and kind of pace and everything like that. The house style is kind of lethargic in a lot of ways. Mandalorian season 1, I think, is an outlier, and so is Andor, but like the Book of Boba Fett, Robert Fettuccine.
Robert Fettuccine's Tatooine Syndicini it's legally a show.
I guess so. And then the two best episodes are the backdoor Mandalorian episodes.
That was insane. Why is this pivotal plot moment to the Mandalorian happening during the middle of Robert Fettuccine's day out?
I truly have no idea. Because my mom is a big Mandalorian fan.
Yeah.
Didn't want to watch the Book of Boba Fett. She's like, I don't really care.
Understandable.
Yeah. And I was like, well, you at least got to watch episode 7, which is an insane thing to tell someone.
Yeah.
Because that's a Mandalorian episode.
It feels like a prank.
It really does. I was like, wait, is this... Is the well, I mean, the music from The Mandalorian was in it. Like,
yes.
Um,
Yes, look, they're clearly dealing with an issue of supply into Mandalorian.
Son of a bitch. So I like the interconnectedness of that universe, but I agree. Like, I would love to see kind of an expansion of the types of stories that are willing to be told. They've always been able to go, here's our mainline movies, and skew younger, but I would love them to skew more mature, if not merely just politically, but also like, violent levels and stuff like that. Or,
Yeah.
for God's sakes, Andor had the first like romantic scene between anybody in Star Wars. Like, there was an actual sex scene in a Star Wars thing.
They almost had the first F-bomb, but then they altered that in post.
Oh yeah.
At the very end. She does not say fight the Empire.
Yeah.
Good old Andor's adoptive mom.
Yeah. That show is so good. I need to rewatch the season before the new season
100%.
starts. But it's I'm hopeful, but I'm also kind of like, this is the one I have the least amount of like foresight about, in terms of like, I truly have no idea what's going to happen, because I've not been able to call any of the shots that have happened. I thought Andor was a stupid idea for a show. It's like, why this character? I mean,
I fully admit to being deeply skeptical, because it's hard not to feel cynical about some of the spin-offs sometimes, especially when they don't live up to the potential that you wish they would. That's why when it was really good, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I will or a good reminder to keep an open mind about these things, because sometimes people have like a really great take on a character or this time period. And who knows, maybe it didn't even have to be Andor. It could have been just like this. It didn't have to be Cassian Andor. It just could have been like, here's the story. This is our way into it. Right. How do we get into this? Well, we have this character we've established already, and we have this actor that people really like. Diego Luna is excellent in this role. What if we followed his story? Yeah. And I think look, you have all of this material. You have all of the extended universe stuff, all of the Star Wars Legend stuff, which you can, as Dave Filoni has shown, you can recanonize in cool and exciting ways. I think they would be well within the rights to look at some of that stuff and figure out what kind of new stories do we want to tell, especially coming up on the 50th anniversary. I feel like it's a great way to kind of be a paradigm shift for the galaxy far, far away, and just usher in this new era of storytelling without throwing out the baby with the space bathwater.
Yeah. The blue milk.
The back to tank water.
There you go. We got there in the end. Yeah. So I'm sort of, I'm excited, but also, I'm more excited for Andor than I am about anything else.
Of course.
I'm very, very excited. Even though that trailer was very weird and had weird music. Rock music doesn't belong in Andor.
Yeah. Only jizz music.
Only jizz. Jizz or no. Anyway. Dan, do you have any final thoughts about Star Wars before we off?
Oh boy. Yeah. You know what? No. Look, at the end of the day, I love Star Wars. I hope what's coming out is good. I want to like Star Wars things that come out, and I hope that other Star Wars things that come out are enjoyable to you as well. That's all. I just am tired of the discourse. I want,
for sure.
Yes.
If you'd have told me 10 years ago that I would be more excited for every new Star Trek thing than I was every new Star Wars thing, because I like Star Trek.
Yeah.
Traditionally, I was always like, yeah, it's fine. But I'm a Star Wars guy. If you'd have told me that every new Star Trek thing would have had me way more excited than every Star Wars thing, I would have told you were a fool and a canard.
Wow. Dropping the C word at the end of the pod.
But maybe, I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is the devil like a lot of people think.
No.
I think she did a really good job with a very hard thing.
Yes.
She was put in a hard position and basically had to fight tooth and nail for everything.
And still made a lot of things and created a lot of value for shareholders, if we want to get corporate about it. But yeah, I think she's done a good job. I completely understand why she would want to step aside as well and like just do other things. And if nothing else, it has me curious. And as I always try to be cautiously optimistic for what lies ahead.
Yes. Well, Dan, thank you very much for joining me in this cold void to talk about.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a warm and welcoming void.
Indeed. It's one of my favorite voids.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah. So by the time this comes out, it will be too late to stop my evil plan.
Oh, no.
No, I will say if you haven't checked out our ongoing tabletop role-playing series over on Geek and Sundry, Sagas of Sundry Goblin Mode, I urge you to check it out. We're coming up on the end of that season. When all is said and done, there will be 20 episodes of epic fantasy storytelling for you. You can listen to it wherever fine podcasts are served, or you can watch video versions on youtube.com/geek and sundry.
You can see two things you can see everything that you can't see in podcast form, but the amazing set design,
Yes.
which really is beautiful and extravagant, and I hope everyone kind of
Clint Carney and his team really crushed that for us. The production design on the show is amazing.
and you can see the ever-changing hair colors of Amy Vorpahl.
Yes, courtesy of Cece Anderson and her team, Edwin Monzon. They just did such a great job with hair and makeup. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm partial to the video version because I think it definitely enhances seeing how we interact with each other. But our editor and producer, Matt Caron, has done such an incredible job with the editing and the sound design that it is really a rich experience no matter how you choose to engage with it.
It truly is. I've told you this. I've said it on the podcast before. I don't care about D&D, but I really enjoy the show. So that, and I'm not just saying that because you are my coworker.
Yes.
And you are all friends of mine.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Kyle Anderson. You can follow me on Letterboxd at Kyle_Anderson. Please join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit Nerdist.com.